What would you do if you lost your child at a carnival only to spot her on a poster? But 14 years later, imagine it. You're standing in front of a poster at a carnival. The vibrant colors of the fairgrounds around you, cotton candy Ferris wheels, and laughter filling the air. But then your eyes lock on something that stops your heart. It's a face. You recognize a face that you thought you'd never see again, the face of your child, your missing child. This isn't a fantasy or a coincidence. It's a true story. A story that begins with a father's worst nightmare and takes you down a dark path of secrets, deception, and psychological manipulation. A case that went cold for 14 years until one unexpected moment shattered everything. And this is the story of Evan Blake, a man who thought his life had been ripped apart beyond repair. But when he saw a poster on a random afternoon, his worst fears became a reality. The search for his daughter Leia was about to take a devastating, life-altering twist. It was a beautiful Saturday in June. One of those perfect summer days that seemed to stretch on forever. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over everything, the kind of day that makes you forget about responsibilities and just enjoy the moment. Evan Blake, a 24-year-old single father from Portland, Oregon, had planned this day for months. He was looking forward to the carnival with his daughter Leia. She was 5, full of energy, and always the first one to suggest they do something fun. Evan couldn't remember the last time they had a day just for themselves, and he was determined to make this one unforgettable. They arrived at the traveling carnival just as the afternoon heat was starting to subside. The air smelled like popcorn and cotton candy, and the vibrant colors of the tents, rides, and games made the place feel like it was straight out of a dream. Leia's eyes lit up when she saw the Ferris wheel in the distance, and she immediately started pulling on Evan's hand, eager to explore. "Daddy, look, the Ferris wheel, can we go?" she begged, her small face full of excitement. Evan smiled and nodded, already knowing this was going to be her favorite part of the day. They walked past the rows of carnival games, the sounds of laughter and music filling the air. And he couldn't help but feel a wave of happiness as he watched his daughter's excitement grow. And they finally reached the Ferris wheel, and Evan helped Leia into the small, colorful cart as the wheels slowly started to turn. Leia squealed with delight, her little hands pressed against the cold metal bars. Evan watched her with a proud smile, his heart swelling with love. This was the kind of memory he wanted to create with her, simple, carefree moments that she'd treasure forever. And after a few minutes, they got off the ride and started walking toward the other side of the carnival. Leia was bouncing around, pointing out every game, every light, and every sign. Evan couldn't help but laugh at how much energy she had. But soon his attention was diverted by a conversation with a friend he hadn't seen in years, Matt, who was working one of the carnival games. "Hey, Evan, over here," Matt called, waving him over. "Matt, long time no see." Evan grinned, moving toward the game booth. "What's up?" Matt gave him a warm handshake. "Not much, just running this game for the weekend. It's good to see you and Leia enjoying the carnival." Evan glanced over at Leia, who was already eyeing the nearby balloon darts. "Yeah, we've been looking forward to this for weeks. She's loving it so far, glad to hear it," Matt said with a chuckle. "Tell you what, I've got a deal for you. Get 3 darts, win a prize. I'll give you a discount for the family." Evan laughed, taking the offer. "You know, she's going to want every stuffed animal in sight, right?" Matt smirked. "I know how it goes. Just make sure she doesn't clean out the booth." Leia was already skipping over to the balloon dart game. Eagerly bouncing in place, Evan turned to Matt and said, "I'll be right there. Just let me catch up with her." Matt nodded, and Evan quickly walked over to Leia, who was now holding the dart in her tiny hand. She grinned up at him, her face full of determination. "I'm gonna win, Daddy." Evan crouched down beside her, giving her a playful wink. "Got this, kiddo, just aim for the red ones, okay?" Leia nodded seriously, her small hand trembling slightly. As she threw the dart, it hit the balloon with a satisfying pop, and her face lit up in excitement. Evan felt a rush of pride. This was the Leia he loved, brave, full of energy, and determined. After a few more rounds of darts, the two of them moved on to check out some other games. It was only supposed to be a few minutes of fun before heading over to the food truck for some cotton candy, but when Evan turned around to grab his wallet, that's when it happened. In a brief moment of distraction, Leia disappeared. It wasn't like she had wandered off far, just a few steps ahead, chasing after a balloon vendor, Evan thought. But when he turned back, she wasn't there anymore. His heart dropped into his stomach, and he spun around, frantically scanning the crowd. "Leia," he called out, his voice rising in panic. "Leia." The carnival seemed to stretch out in every direction, people laughing, shouting, and music playing. But all Evan could hear now was the pounding of his heart in his ears. He pushed past people, his eyes darting around, looking for any sign of his little girl. He rushed back to the balloon dart booth. "Matt," he shouted, "have you seen Leia?" Matt looked up, confusion crossing his face. "No, man, wasn't she with you?" Evan's stomach churned. He grabbed Matt's shoulders, his hands shaking. "She was right here. She was just right here." Matt, now concerned, turned around and started scanning the crowd. Okay, stay calm, we'll find her. I'll call for some help." Evan didn't hear him. All he could hear was the sound of his own breathing, ragged and uneven, as he sprinted through the carnival. Calling Leia's name, the bright lights of the carnival seemed to blur around him, and panic seized his chest. He ran to the security booth, but the guard was busy with a few others. Evan's mind raced. What if someone had taken her? What if she'd been lost in the crowd? "Leia," he yelled again, and the desperation in his voice, cutting through the noise. Minutes turned into an hour. Then two. Every security guard was looking, and every booth was searched, and the police arrived shortly after, their faces grim. But even with all their resources, they came up with nothing. Leia had vanished without a trace. The carnival was torn apart piece by piece, yet no sign of the little girl who'd been there just hours ago. There were no clues, no witnesses. No one had seen anything unusual. The police were stumped, and the carnival workers couldn't recall any strange behavior. Evan collapsed into a chair, his hands gripping his hair. His eyes vacant with fear, he could hear his voice cracking, the words spilling out in a quiet whisper. "Where is she? What happened to my baby?" The police issued a public statement. 5-year-old Leia Blake was last seen around 300 p.m. Today she was wearing a yellow dress and had short blonde hair. The search is ongoing, and the days dragged on. Every lead turned cold. Every piece of evidence was a dead end, and the case went from a search and rescue to a cold investigation. And soon the entire town began to move on, but not Evan. For 14 years, he'd lived in a prison of guilt, consumed by the search for his daughter. Every waking moment, he wondered, what if she's out there? What if she's waiting for me to find her? But what no one knew at that moment, as they packed up the carnival, turned off the lights, and moved on with their lives, was that someone had been watching. Evan Blake's life had never been the same since the day his daughter Leia vanished. The guilt consumed him relentlessly, gnawing at his mind every waking hour. It was as if he could feel it physically. The weight of it pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The day happened. He'd been distracted just 5 minutes. That's all it had taken for his world to unravel. It had been a sunny Saturday in Portland, Oregon, the kind of day where people go out and let their hair down, and the traveling carnival had come to town. Bright colors and the sounds of the rides beckoning from across the street. Evan had planned it all, a special father-daughter day out. He wanted to make it up to Leia. For all the days he'd been absent, buried in work and school, as a 24-year-old nursing student. He had dreams, but those dreams felt so small. In the face of his daughter's sparkling eyes, Leia had been so excited that morning. Her little hands clutching his as they made their way through the fairgrounds, she tugged on his sleeve, pointing at the Ferris wheel and the cotton candy. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. He'd only turned away for a moment to help a friend when a carnival game. Just a moment. When he turned back, she was gone, the crowd, the noise. It all felt like it swallowed her whole. He had called her name and searched every corner of the carnival. But she was nowhere. The panic that gripped him in those first few minutes soon gave way to sheer terror. Evan raced to the police, reporting his daughter missing. Hours turned into days, and then weeks. The investigation began. But as the days turned to months, the media coverage faded. The police had no new leads, no suspects, nothing. Leia had vanished without a trace. The case went cold, and the media moved on to other stories, other tragedies. People forgot, but not Evan. Not for a single moment. He couldn't forget. The guilt never let him go. A constant shadow hanging over him every day. Every night, he thought about what he could have done differently, what he could have seen, if only he hadn't been so wrapped up in the game. What if he'd never looked away? What if he had held her hand just a little bit tighter? He couldn't live like that anymore. Evan made a decision. He couldn't just sit idly by, letting time rob him of his daughter. He dropped out of nursing school, abandoning his dream of becoming a nurse. Every part of his life that had once made sense felt trivial compared to the hole in his heart and the overwhelming feeling that he was failing Leia. He knew that to find her, he had to go beyond what the police were doing. They'd given up, but he couldn't. He started his own investigation. He became obsessed, tracking down any carnival that had visited Portland around the time of Leia's disappearance. He pored over old police reports, looking for any small clue that might have been missed. He learned about the companies that ran these traveling circuses, their owners and their staff. He called them one by one, hoping for someone to slip, for someone to say something that would lead him to his daughter. But every phone call, every email led to dead ends. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. The carnival companies had moved on. Most of the performers and workers had left Portland long ago. It seemed impossible still. Evan couldn't stop. He went to online forums, posting every detail of his daughter's disappearance, hoping that someone somewhere had seen something. He talked to other parents whose children had gone missing under similar circumstances. Some gave him advice. Some offered their sympathy, but none gave him the answers he desperately needed. He even hired private detectives. They scoured the country but found no sign of Leia. And the cost of his obsession was high, though the emotional toll on Evan was immense. He grew distant from his friends and family, consumed by the need to find Leia. They didn't understand. His mother would call, urging him to move on. You can't keep chasing ghosts. She said his father stopped calling altogether. Even his closest friends distanced themselves, tired of hearing about dead-end leads and false hope. Evan didn't care. He couldn't care every day. He lived with the crushing weight of knowing that his daughter was out there somewhere, but he didn't know where. Every morning he woke up with the same thought: I will find her. I will bring her home. His search took him across the country. He went to places he'd never imagined meeting, strange people along the way. He visited old fairs and asked questions no one had ever asked. And then came the day when his frustration boiled over. Evan had tracked down one ringmaster, a man named Dean Corbin, who ran a circus that had been in Portland the year Leia disappeared. Evan had his suspicions about the man. Too many missing children have been linked to similar circuses. When the man refused to meet him, Evan decided to confront him directly that day. Evan found himself at the circus's headquarters, standing face to face with Corbin, demanding answers. But Corbin wasn't the type to be intimidated. The confrontation escalated. And before Evan knew it, he was being escorted out by security. He was arrested for trespassing and disorderly conduct. The humiliation, the anger, it only fueled his drive even more. But in the end, it didn't matter. The circus had packed up and left town the very next day, and Corbin's refusal to speak made it clear Evan was on his own time. We're on months past, years. Even the world around Evan continued, but for him, everything had stopped, and the holidays were the hardest. But the absence of Leia's laugh echoing in the silence of his home. Birthdays came and went without celebration. His own existence became a blur of searching, hoping, and waiting for a miracle that seemed more and more unlikely with every passing day. And then came the day that changed everything. Evan was visiting a local coffee shop in Portland, his eyes scanning the newspaper in front of him. He wasn't expecting much after all. He'd been through this routine countless times, hoping for a lead, only to have the world disappoint him once again. But something caught his eye. A poster. It was colorful with bold lettering, and it was hung on a telephone pole just outside the shop. It was a flyer for a traveling circus, a show that had just arrived in town. And the poster was vibrant, showcasing performers, animals, and a large red and white striped tent. But it was the face of one performer that made his heart stop there. In the center of the poster was a woman, her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her bright blue eyes seemed to stare directly at Evan. Her expression was confident, proud. She wore a red costume, a performer's outfit. But it wasn't the costume that made Evan's blood run cold. It was the birthmark, the exact same one that Leia had had on her left arm. Visible on the woman's right, it was faded now. Just like the memory of his daughter, but the shape was unmistakable. His breath hitched in his chest. This was impossible, the circus. The woman on the poster was. It a coincidence, could it be? But there was no mistaking it. Evan couldn't move. He stood frozen, his eyes glued to the flyer. That woman was his daughter. Evan Blake had lived through years of pain. It had been 14 long years since he'd last seen his daughter Leia. In that time, he had numbed himself with the routine of life and tried to find solace in the things that didn't remind him of her work isolation. And most recently, a new connection at 38. Evan had become a man defined by his grief, a father with no child to hold. No one to call his own. He had learned to exist, but not to live. When he'd found Samantha Miller online. His life had been nothing more than a gray blur of routines, but Sam was different. It had started with simple messages, nothing too personal, just small exchanges about the everyday books, movies, mundane things that allowed them both to stay afloat in the vast ocean of their loneliness. Slowly that turned into phone calls then, video chats, and through it all, Evan found himself looking forward to the warmth that Samantha's words brought to his cold, lonely existence. Her smile on the screen made him remember what it was like to hope. After a year of conversations, they decided to meet. Sam lived in Crestwood, Oregon, and despite the trepidation gnawing at him, Evan knew this meeting would be different. It was a chance to finally step out of the past, to begin moving forward. Maybe he could learn how to breathe again. But no matter how much he wanted to forget the past, it had a way of following him. Like a shadow, he wasn't ready to completely open up. Not to Sam, and certainly not to her 8-year-old son, Luke. He was afraid. That the moment he let his guard down and the unbearable weight of the past would crush him again. The train ride into Crestwood felt longer than it was, and the motion of the train had become a lullaby to Evan's weary soul. But it wasn't enough to make him forget the ghosts of the past that continued to haunt him every stop, every passing town, every creak and groan of the train's wheels. As they met, the tracks reminded him of the years of searching for his daughter, searching for answers, searching for closure. As the train pulled into Crestwood, Evan could feel the anticipation building in his chest, and there was excitement, yes, but also annoying emptiness. A part of him still clung to the old pain, the pain of never knowing what had happened to Leia. Evan stepped off the train, suitcase in hand. He looked up, scanning the crowd. That's when he saw her, Sam. She was standing near the exit, looking exactly as she had in the pictures they'd exchanged online. But more real, more vibrant. There was something about her presence that made him feel like he was stepping into a different world. One that didn't have to be defined by his loss, Sam. He said, his voice almost breaking the silence between them. Sam smiled and walked toward him. She didn't say much, but when she hugged him, it was like a release, a deep breath of fresh air that Evan had longed for. She had this calming energy about her, and in that moment, the storm in his chest began to quiet. As she pulled back, she introduced Luke. Her son, Luke, was an energetic 8-year-old boy who wasted no time in making Evan feel welcome. His laughter was pure and innocent. "Mom, show me your picture. You look taller in real life," Luke said, his face lighting up with curiosity. Evan couldn't help but laugh, the tension in his shoulders easing a little. "And you look exactly like your mom described you, smart and cool." "I brought my Switch. Maybe we can play Mario Kart later." Luke's face lit up. "I'm the best at Mario Kart," he said, eager for the challenge. The three of them walked to the parking lot, Evan carrying his suitcase, while Sam led the way. There was an ease to their steps, a familiarity that made Evan feel like he had known Sam and Luke for far longer than he had. It felt like a beginning, a new chapter. But even in the warmth of the moment, Evan's mind couldn't fully escape the weight of the past as they drove through the small town of Crestwood. Sam seemed determined to show Evan the sights, to give him a sense of the place she called home. It wasn't long before they ended up in Hollow Creek Park. The crisp autumn air greeted them as they walked along a winding trail, the trees towering above them, casting long shadows over. The path Luke, as expected, ran ahead, his energy unstoppable. Evan and Sam walked slower, their conversation light, but with an underlying tension, like two people trying to figure out where their relationship was headed. As they strolled, Sam began to point out the landmarks in the park. "This is Hollow Creek Park," she explained. "It's known for those ancient oak trees. It's my favorite place in town." Evan looked around, taking in the scenery. It was peaceful here. Calming, there was a serenity in the air that he hadn't realized he needed. It was nice, even if it still felt like something was missing. They continued walking for a while, until Luke suddenly called out, "Mom, look, there's a circus." Evan looked up and saw the colorful poster attached to a lamp post, "Draven's Mystique Circus." It read in bold, dramatic letters beneath that the image of performers under the bright lights of the circus tent, acrobats, clowns, and a tiger trainer. Sam looked at it briefly and commented, "That must be in East Meadow. They hold all the seasonal events and town festivals over there." Luke was already pulling at Sam's sleeve. "Can we go, please?" But Evan couldn't look away. Something about that poster, something about the woman in the center of it. Her eyes, her smile made his heart stop. It wasn't just the fact that the woman on the poster looked familiar. It was the uncanny resemblance to someone he hadn't thought about in years. His daughter Leia, her eyes. Those deep blue eyes were exactly like Leia's. Her smile, the way it curled at the corners of her mouth, was so familiar. And the birthmark, the distinctive birthmark on her arm. It was identical to Leia's, though hers had been on her left arm. Evan froze in place. The world around him blurred, and for a moment he wasn't walking with Sam and Luke anymore. He was back in 1995, back at the carnival, the last time he saw his daughter. And the last time he held her hand was before she vanished. Sam noticed the change in his expression. She stopped walking, her hand gently touching his arm. "Evan, are you okay?" He didn't answer. His eyes were still, locked on the poster. The resemblance was so striking, so perfect, that it felt like a sick joke. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet as he stepped closer to the poster, examining every detail. The same eyes, the same smile, the same birthmark. But how could it be possible? Could it really be Leia? 14 years of unanswered questions, of dead-end leads, of living with a haunting guilt of losing her. And now, after all that time, here was a woman who looked exactly like her, standing on a poster for a circus that had come through town. Sam Evans' voice was shaky. "This woman, she looks like my daughter." His hand trembled as he pointed at the image. Sam looked at the poster, her brow furrowed. "It does look like Leia," she said slowly, sensing the change in his demeanor. "But Evan, this is crazy, right? It's probably just a coincidence." But Evan wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing. He felt a familiar cold fear creeping into his chest. He'd lived with his grief for so long, never allowing himself to hope again. But now, standing here, facing this woman's image, he couldn't ignore it. His heart was pounding in his chest. Was it possible for a moment time seemed to stand still? There were too many questions and not enough answers. And as much as Evan wanted to believe it, part of him was terrified of the truth, because if it was her, if this woman really was Leia, then everything he thought he knew about her disappearance, everything about his life, was a lie. He folded the poster, his hands shaking, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The silence between them stretched on. Sam, sensing the weight of the moment, finally spoke. "We don't have to go," she said softly. "We can do something else." "But if you're sure," Evan nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "No, it's okay. Let's go. We should check it out." Luke was already tugging at Sam's sleeve, eager to see the circus. But Evan was no longer sure he was ready to face the show. What if it was her? What would he do? What if it wasn't? And what if he was about to uncover something that would change everything forever? Evan stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the carnival poster. The bright colors of the circus advertisement blurred around him. But his eyes were fixed on the face of the woman Arya. She smiled at the camera, surrounded by tigers and flashing lights, but it was her eyes, those striking, vibrant blue eyes, that made Evan's heart race. He blinked, trying to shake off the pounding sensation in his chest. It wasn't just her eyes. It was something more, a feeling deep in his gut, a sense of familiarity. He couldn't ignore this woman. She looked like Leia. For a moment, he felt the world tilt beneath him. Was it possible, after 14 years of silence, of unanswered questions, could this woman be his daughter? Could his mind be playing tricks on him, or was there something more here, something he had to face? Sam noticed the sudden change in his demeanor. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, sensing the shift in his emotions. "Evan, you okay?" He blinked again, refocusing on the poster. The woman's features, particularly the birthmark on her arm, were undeniable. It was the same spot where Leia had hers, a small distinctive mark that had always stood out to him. It was Leia's birthmark only. It had been faded over time, just like the memories Evan had buried deep inside him. His voice faltered, trying to find the words. "I think I have to see the show tomorrow. I need to see her in person." Sam's face softened with concern. She understood the gravity of the situation. Evan had been consumed with the loss of his daughter for years. The case had gone cold. The police had stopped searching, and over time, so had he. At least, he tried to. "Are you sure?" Sam asked quietly, her voice laced with empathy. She could see the struggle in his eyes. "We don't know anything yet. It could just be a coincidence." Evan stared at the poster one more time. Then it's Sam. "I have to know," he said, his voice trembling. "I have to know if it's really her." Sam nodded, her expression understanding. But tinged with worry, they bought tickets for the next day's show. It was a step Evan didn't take lightly. His heart was heavy, a mix of hope and fear clawing at him. Tomorrow the past would either be put to rest or would come crashing back, rewriting everything he thought he knew. That night, Evan tossed and turned in his rental apartment. The weight of the upcoming day pressed down on him like 1,000 bricks. He could hardly breathe. The memories of Leia. Her laugh, her bright eyes, and the way she used to tug on his sleeve and beg for cotton candy. At the carnival were all so vivid. He pulled out his phone. His fingers shaking as he scrolled through the pictures, he found it the last photo he had of Leia. It was from that fateful day at the carnival. Before she vanished, she was holding a giant blue cotton candy. Her tongue painted the same vibrant shade, and she was laughing. Her blue eyes, sparkling with joy, stared at it. For what felt like hours, the photo, blurring as tears threatened to spill. Where did she go? What happened to her? Those were the questions that had haunted him for the last 14 years. But tonight, something felt different in the discovery of the poster, the woman's face, the birthmark. It was all too much of a coincidence. His heart told him there was more to this than just chance. Evan's mind drifted back to the years of searching, the countless hours spent going through old leads, the fruitless meetings with detectives, the false hope that came with each new tip. The police had dismissed him, telling him it was a cold case. They had moved on to other things. Friends had told him to let go, that it was time to heal. But how could he? How could he ever move on when every day felt like a reminder of Leia's absence? The guilt ate away at him, gnawing at him from the inside. "You need to let go, Evan." They'd said, "It's been too long. She's probably gone. Just move forward with your life." But Evan couldn't. He wouldn't. There had been those years when he almost gave up. When his hope was stretched thinner than he could bear, he had thought of starting over, maybe getting a fresh start, moving somewhere new, and trying to build a life that wasn't consumed by the pain of Leia's disappearance. But he couldn't do it. Every time he thought about it, the image of her face, that little girl with the cotton candy, came rushing back to him. He would never stop looking for her. That's when the tip resurfaced in his mind. The one that had come from an anonymous source years ago. A tip about missing children at traveling carnivals, about performers who moved from town to town, and strange disappearances that followed them. It had seemed like an unlikely lead at the time. But now, as Evan sat alone in the dim light of his apartment, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The circus, the performers, the travels, and this Arya, the resemblance to Leia, was uncanny, but there had to be more. It couldn't just be a random coincidence. The birthmark on Arya's arm, the same as Leia's, couldn't be dismissed. Evan felt his pulse quicken as he connected the dots. Had you been part of the circus all along? Was this part of something bigger? Had you been taken? Or had someone just found her? He couldn't shake the feeling that the circus Draven's mystique was somehow connected to everything. And the way it kept moving, crossing borders, staying just out of reach of authorities, and the circus had been the site of other mysterious disappearances in the past. But no one had ever been able to prove it. And now Evan was standing at the edge of something big tomorrow. When he faced Arya, he would either find the answers he'd been searching for, or he would confirm his worst fear that the past was forever lost, and he would never find Leia again. Evan stood up, pacing back and forth in the apartment. He couldn't sit still. His mind was racing with thoughts and possibilities, each one darker than the last. Glanced at the clock. Just a few more hours until the circus show tomorrow. His life would change. He would face the past, no matter what it revealed, no matter how devastating it could be. Evan knew that he couldn't walk away from this without knowing the truth as he stared out the window. With the dark night settling over Crestwood, he made a vow to himself: if Arya was Leia, if she was truly his daughter, he would do everything in his power to bring her home. And if she wasn't, then he would finally let go, no matter how much it broke him tomorrow. He would find out tomorrow. He would face his past, and no matter what happened. Evan knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for his daughter. The clock ticked down the minutes, and as Evan lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the past 14 years pressing down on him, he whispered to the quiet room, Tomorrow, I'll know." Evan had never been a superstitious man. He had always relied on facts, evidence, and his instincts, his gut feeling. But something was off. He had been following Arya ever since he spotted her at the circus, and the more he watched, and the more uneasy he became. It wasn't the performance itself. No, that was thrilling. Arya's act with the tiger was nothing short of breathtaking. But as Evan watched her, he began noticing things that he couldn't ignore. Small details: the way she moved, the way she seemed to go through the motions of the performance. Her eyes locked in a distant stare, as if she were on autopilot. There was no spark behind her eyes, no warmth, no life. She was a performer. Yes, but something was off. Every action, every word, every smile felt like a scripted play, rehearsed so many times that it had lost all authenticity. It was as if she wasn't there at all. As the show ended and the crowds began filing out of the circus tent, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at a shell of a person. Someone who had been carefully crafted, molded into something she wasn't. Why was he so sure of this? Because deep down he knew the real Arya. He had seen her before in the face of his own daughter, the girl he lost 14 years ago. This was the same woman, but she wasn't acting like herself. She was controlled. Evan couldn't help himself. He had to know more. As the audience dispersed, he slipped away from Sam and Luke and made his way toward the circus owner, Robert Draven. He wasn't sure why, but Draven's behavior had raised red flags for him as well, and there was something about the man that didn't sit right. Maybe it was his overconfidence, or the way he carried himself with an air of authority that seemed almost unnatural. He moved through the crowds with a presence that didn't allow for a single person to question him. Evan observed Draven from the sidelines. He wasn't sure what to make of him yet, but something about his mannerisms made Evan uneasy. Robert Draven wasn't like any other circus owner he'd seen. He was different, and Evan felt a deep sense of discomfort every time their eyes met. It was subtle, but Evan had a knack for sensing when something wasn't right, and Draven's gaze lingered just a moment too long. The next morning, Evan did what he always did when something piqued his suspicion. He researched. He sat at his desk, pulling up his laptop and typing in the name of the circus, Draven's Mystique Circus. What he found was unsettling. Draven, he learned, had taken over the circus from a man named Victor Cohen. The circus had been performing under different names and management. But after Cohen's departure, Draven had rebranded it entirely. A new name, a new image, a whole new story. But Evan dug deeper. The more he searched, the more strange coincidences kept popping up. He came across a handful of older news articles that mentioned a few of the performers in the circus from the past. Among them, Draven's name appeared again and again. But something about his history didn't add up. The timeline fell off, so Evan kept digging. His heart raced with every new discovery. He came across a photograph of the original owner of the circus, Victor Cohen. And then he found another image, this one of Robert Draven, who had seemingly taken over Cohen's legacy. And that's when it hit him. Evan zoomed in on the photo of Draven. The scar on his cheek, the one that had always been hidden behind his stern, almost intimidating expression in the photo of Cohen. Evan saw the exact same scar, in the same place, the same one on the same side of their face. But that wasn't the only thing that bothered him in the image of Draven. There was something Evan recognized instantly, a distinctive ring with a green stone that both men wore on their fingers. Evan had been staring at Draven's hand throughout the entire show, and the same ring, the same symbol. It couldn't be a coincidence. Evan's breath caught in his throat. Was it possible he stared at the photos for a long time, comparing them? The more he looked, the more convinced he became. Robert Draven wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't just an opportunist looking to run a successful circus. Draven was someone else entirely, someone much darker. Evan's mind spun as the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Victor Cohen wasn't just a circus owner. He wasn't just someone who sold his business and disappeared. No, Cohen had disappeared. But Robert Draven had been born in his place. Evan's hands trembled as the truth began to sink in. They were the same man. It was all too much to process in one sitting. Evan stepped away from the screen and took a deep breath. But there was no denying it anymore. Everything Evan had seen, the scar, the ring, the mannerisms, the familiar face pointed to one horrifying reality. Draven had assumed a new identity. He had changed his name. He had erased everything. Even the circus with its new identity and its revamped reputation had been a front, all of it. He wasn't just hiding from the law. He wasn't just reinventing himself. No, this man had erased everything he had ever been. He had buried his past so deeply that no one would ever find out who he truly was. And it wasn't just the circus that was part of this game. Draven had a much darker secret buried beneath the layers of his new life. Evan's heart pounded in his chest as the truth hit him like a freight train. Robert Draven didn't just steal children from their families. He erased them. He turned them into someone else. Aria wasn't the first. She wasn't the only one. She had just been the one to slip through the cracks of his manipulation. And Evan had stumbled upon her by pure chance. But the deeper Evan dug, the more he realized the horrifying extent of Draven's reach. This wasn't just about Leia anymore. This was about children, dozens, if not hundreds, who had been stolen, manipulated, and brainwashed, children who had been transformed into something they weren't, children whose memories have been wiped away, whose identities have been taken from them piece by piece until they became nothing more than shadows of their former selves. Evan slammed the laptop shut. His thoughts raced. His hands were shaking. What could he do? His daughter, his sweet, innocent Leia, was just one of many victims in this twisted game. And Robert Draven, Victor Cohen, was at the center of it all. The realization of what he had uncovered left him breathless. The man who had taken his daughter, who had stolen her from him, wasn't just hiding. He wasn't just a monster who took children. No, he was something much more terrifying. Draven had built an empire of lies, weaving a web of deceit so complex that no one could even begin to see the truth. But Evan saw it now. He had uncovered the face behind a mask, and he wasn't about to let it go. The air outside the circus tent was buzzing with excitement. Yet Evan felt nothing but a cold pit in his stomach. He had waited for this moment for years, but now that it was finally here, he couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was about to unfold. Sam Luke and he had spent the day exploring the carnival grounds. But while they were laughing and playing, Evan's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Arya. She looked too much like Leia, every detail from his striking blue eyes to the birthmark on her left arm. He couldn't get the image of her out of his mind. His heart raced as he made his way toward the back of the circus, hoping for one last confirmation that would either make him feel the relief of closure or the crushing weight of a new nightmare as he walked through the darker, quieter paths behind the circus tents. Evan's footsteps slowed. He had been here before. This place where the circus staff gathered and prepared for the shows was usually off limits to the public. But Evan wasn't just anyone. Now he was a father, desperate to find the truth, even if it meant stepping into places where he wasn't supposed to be. Then as he rounded the corner of a large storage tent, he froze there in the dim light of the late afternoon. Stood Robert Draven, the circus owner, but it wasn't just him. He was with Arya and another young girl, and they were sitting in a secluded spot behind the tents under the shade of a large oak tree. And what Evan saw next sent chills down his spine. Robert was speaking softly, his voice low and rhythmic. Almost hypnotic, he was using his hands and gentle, fluid motions as if weaving a spell, directing the two women's attention. And they were both completely still too, and their eyes were vacant, their bodies rigid. It was like they were under a trance. Evan's blood ran cold. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Hypnosis, he had heard of it before, in vague whispers and rumors. But never had he imagined he would find his daughter, or someone who looked so much like her, entrapped like this. His heart raced, but he kept himself hidden, crouching behind a stack of crates. He needed to understand what was happening here. Here was this, the man who had taken Leia. Was this the circus leader who had stolen her? His gut screamed that Robert Draven was more than just a circus owner. He was a predator. Evan stepped back, trying to catch his breath and form a plan. The thought of confronting Robert made his pulse quicken. But he had to act. He had to find the truth. He couldn't just walk away now. Evan reached for his phone, intending to record the scene, but just before he could hit record, Robert spoke again. Listen. Robert's voice was calm, almost soothing. He seemed unaware of Evan's presence. You've been a good girl, are you? You've earned your place here. You've earned your future. The other girl, her name was Alina. Evan now realized, nodded, her expression empty. Arya, however, didn't even blink. She just stared into space, her face a mask of nothingness. Robert continued. I'll give you more, Arya, if you ever need anything. Anything at all, just ask. I'll make sure you never want for anything. All I need from you is your loyalty and, of course, a little discretion. Evan's heart dropped. Loyalty, discretion. This wasn't just a father losing his daughter. It was about someone controlling her, manipulating her, and turning her into a puppet. He was sick to his stomach, but there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, Evan stepped forward, making his presence known enough He said, his voice steady but firm, and the words tasted bitter in his mouth. But he couldn't keep quiet any longer. This man had stolen his daughter. He had destroyed her life, and Evan wasn't going to let him do it to anyone else. Robert's head snapped up the trance on Arya, and Alina was broken instantly. But the way they reacted was strange, like they were slowly waking up from a dream. Arya blinked rapidly, her eyes fluttering as if trying to shake off the fog in her mind. Alina's gaze flickered between Robert and Evan, confusion written all over her face. Robert's expression darkened. "What are you doing here?" His tone was no longer calm or collected, it was threatening. "I could ask you the same thing." Evan shot back. "What is this? What have you done to them? What have you done to her?" He pointed at Arya. Robert took a step forward, but Evan didn't back down. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Robert warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can walk in here and disrupt everything I've worked for? I built this circus. I gave her a life, a purpose. You stole her life." Evan shouted. His anger had finally exploded. "You took my daughter. You brainwashed her all of this. It's a lie." Robert's eyes flickered with annoyance, then something darker. "I did what I had to do. She was lost. She needed a home. What's the real story here, Evan? You think you have some moral high ground, but you don't. You failed her." The words hit like a slap. Evan's fists clenched, but he kept himself in check. "I never failed her. I never gave up looking, and now I've found her. You found her." Robert sneered. "You don't get it. She's my daughter now. She's better off here. She's better off with me." Evan couldn't take it anymore. With one powerful lunge, he shoved Robert back, sending him stumbling toward the edge of the stream. Robert tripped over his own feet, falling hard onto the wet ground, his head striking a sharp rock. Evan stood over him, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from years of anguish and pain, finally boiling over. "You're not going to get away with this," Evan said, his voice cold. He turned away from Robert, who groaned and sat up holding his head dazed. Just then Sam appeared around the corner, her phone in hand. She'd seen the commotion and quickly started recording. Evan turned back to Robert, who was now trying to rise. "I think the world deserves to know who you really are," Sam said, her voice steady but filled with the strength of someone who had watched her partner suffer for far too long. Robert's eyes narrowed. "You don't have proof, you can't." "I don't need proof, Robert," Evan said, taking a deep breath. "I am the proof." If the distant sound of sirens reached their ears, and Robert's eyes flickered with panic. "You've made a mistake," he said. "You have no idea what you're messing with." Evan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The police were already on their way, and Robert had no more lies to hide behind. The police arrived just as Robert was being dragged to his feet by one of the officers. He was arrested on charges of kidnapping, manipulation, and several other heinous crimes that Evan had finally been able to expose. Arya and Alina were taken into protective custody, their blank, hypnotized expressions finally breaking as they were led to safety. But as the police moved in, Evan couldn't shake the thought that had been nagging at him ever since he first saw Arya. Would she remember who she really was? Would Leia, the girl he had loved and lost, ever return to him? Or had this circus taken too much of her? As the police car drove away with Robert in the back, and as Evan watched the last of the circus staff get questioned, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the next chapter of this journey ahead. Would Arya ever remember that she was his daughter? Would he ever get his little girl back? The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Evan stepped into the quiet hospital corridor. His heart beat louder than the footsteps that echoed in the hallway. Sam was at his side, her hand resting gently on his arm, offering him a quiet support that he desperately needed. But now, here they were walking down this cold corridor in a place that should have felt like an answer, yet felt nothing like it. The door to the private room stood in front of them, and behind it, Arya, the woman who looked so much like Leia, was undergoing something Evan could barely comprehend inside a EM. Psychologist and a hypnotherapist were working with her. Evan had been told they were trying to help her recover memories, real memories, the ones Robert Draven had stolen from her. So many years ago, the knock on the door was soft, almost hesitant. The therapist opened it. A gentle smile on her face, though her eyes carried the weight of the past hour. "Mr. Blake," she said, "he's ready for you." Evan's breath hitched his hands, which had been trembling since he saw Arya perform at the circus, grew colder with each passing second. Sam squeezed his arm before she pulled back, giving him the space he needed stepping into the room. Evan saw Arya sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, her back turned to him. She was staring out the window, lost in thought. The therapist, Dr. Collins, stood off to the side, observing the delicate balance of the moment. Arya's blonde hair, now a little tousled, framed her face differently than when he first saw her in the circus. She looked fragile, a far cry from the confident, poised woman he had seen entertaining crowds. She was someone else entirely, now someone who didn't know who she truly was. Taking a deep breath, Evan approached slowly, his steps tentative. "Are you?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and weariness. "Who are you?" She asked, her voice quiet but sharp. She had the same eyes as Leia, but there was something different now. They were guarded, as if she had shut herself off from the world. I'm your father," Evan said, his voice cracking slightly. The words felt so surreal he hadn't spoken them aloud in 14 years. Father. Arya didn't react at first. She just stared at him. And then slowly she looked down at her hands, as if trying to make sense of the world around her. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "No, you're not." And Evan's heart sank, but he couldn't stop now. He had waited for so long and fought so hard to get to this moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was the last picture he had of Leia before she disappeared, Leia at the carnival. Her face full of joy as she held a blue cotton candy, the sugar sticking to her lips. "Look at this," Evan said, his voice breaking. "This is a picture of you. When you were 5, you were at a carnival. Our carnival. The one you went missing from." Arya hesitated, her gaze falling onto the photo for a moment. Her face remained blank, unreadable. But then slowly something flickered in her eyes, a trace of recognition. Her fingers trembled as she took the photograph, staring at it like it was a puzzle piece. She was struggling to fit into her own story. "I remember that day," she whispered. Evan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you remember, Arya?" She sat there silent for a long moment, as though the memories were battling each other inside her mind. Then suddenly the words spilled out, and the blue cotton candy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the blue. It tasted like blueberries, but sweeter." She paused, staring at the photo in her hand. There was a Ferris wheel. I was scared to go on it, but you held my hand. We counted the cars we could see from the top, 14. Red cars. Tears began to fill Evan's eyes. The years of searching, the pain, the torment, it all melted away. In that one moment, this was it. She remembered his daughter. His little Leia was back. Evan could hardly believe what was happening. "You remember, don't you?" he said, his voice filled with hope. "You were there with me at that carnival. We were together." Arya looked up at him, then her eyes wide, as though the weight of everything was crashing down on her. The memories, the lost years, the truth. It all came flooding back, and then, in the softest voice, Arya whispered, "Dad." In that moment, everything shifted. All the pain, all the anguish, all the years spent wondering if she was dead or alive. All of it collapsed into one singular, beautiful truth. Arya was his daughter. Leia was back without thinking. Evan moved closer, his arms reaching out toward her. Arya's eyes were filled with confusion and vulnerability. But in that moment, she let him hold her. He pulled her into his arms, and as they embraced, tears filled his eyes. For so many years, he had longed for this moment, and now was here. Finally, the torment, The unanswered questions, the feeling of being lost, it was all gone for the first time. In 14 years, Evan felt whole again. The years of searching the pain of losing his daughter and the guilt he carried with him, all of it was momentarily forgotten. He was holding his daughter, the child he thought he'd lost forever. Rhea clung to him, the years of manipulation, hypnosis, and confusion, slowly unraveling in the safety of his arms. She cried a soft, broken sob as if her soul was finally beginning to understand what had been stolen from her. Evan whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Araya didn't speak at first, but she didn't need to. The words were already there in the hug they shared and the tears that flowed between them as she was home. Sam, who had been standing by the door, watching the reunion from a distance, stepped forward. Her eyes were misty, a quiet smile on her face as she saw the truth unfold before her. She knew how much Evan had suffered, how much he had sacrificed to get to this point. And now, in the embrace of his daughter, there was no more searching, there was no more wondering. For the first time in so many years, Evan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. His daughter had been lost, but now she was found. Then the years of pain and guilt seemed to dissolve, replaced by a future he had almost given up on. As the tears slowed, Arya pulled back slightly, looking up at Evan with confusion still in her eyes. How did this happen? Why don't I remember you?" Evan looked at her gently, his voice steady. "It's going to take time, but we're going to help you remember. Araya, you're not alone anymore." The truth had finally unraveled. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, one by one. Arya was Leia, his Leia, and together they would heal as the dust settled. The truth was clearer than ever. The man responsible for Arya's abduction, Robert Draven, whose real name was Victor Cohen, now faced federal charges. The charges weren't just about one missing child. They extended to a horrifying network of stolen lives, child abduction, identity theft, psychological abuse. It had all been part of a twisted operation that spanned across countries and decades, but Evan's search wasn't in vain. Leia, now Arya, began the long and delicate process of therapy. The trauma of years spent in an alternate reality, manipulated and controlled, would take time to heal. But she was surrounded by love, something she never had before. And she wasn't alone. As the investigation continued, other victims came forward, children who have been taken and forced to live under false identities, children whose lives had been rewritten and controlled for years. The authorities were closing in, and it was becoming clear just how far Robert, or rather Victor, had gone to conceal his horrifying crimes. Meanwhile, Evan, Sam, and Luke began building a new life together. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but for the first time in over a decade, Evan felt hope again. And the family he had always dreamed of, the one he thought he would never have, was finally taking shape. Luke, with his innocent joy, found a big sister in Arya, and Sam stood by Evan's side, her support unwavering. And they were a family unbroken, despite everything that had been stolen from them. Evan had searched for 14 long years, driven by the painful hope that he would one day find his daughter, and finally he did. He found her. What would you do if someone erased your past? What if your identity, your memories, and your very essence were taken from you? Comment below and let us know what you think about this unbelievable story. How would you feel if you were in Evan's shoes? If this story shook you, if it left you breathless, hit the like button, subscribe, because every week we'll bring you more shocking true stories that make you question everything. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Let's get the word out about these hidden truths, about the people who've been lost, and finally, about the ones who've been found. More real stories, more mystery, and more truth are coming your way. Stay tuned.